On behalf of Carroll County, I'd like to say a special thanks to the state, David Huddleston, and Grant Waldrop back there. Thank you very much for listening to us and honoring the request by the family here and several other citizens that wanted to do this. So very, very appreciative. We have Ernie Reynolds, one of the commissioners, District 5 here. And I'd also like to say we have Scott Cowart, superintendent for the county schools. So thank you both for attending also. David?
Well, good afternoon. How's everybody doing today? Good. I'm gonna tell you, it's a wonderful day in Roopville.
Yeah.
To see the crowd that has shown up. Like I was telling Mayor Easton, I said, when this happens, you know it's the right thing to do. So I'm David Huddleston. I'm just a farmer who lives about 3 miles from here, but I have the great opportunity to be in the state rep that represents Roopville. I just kind of wanted to share a little bit about the process of when the request was made. Michelle come to me after I just got through finishing up my first term, getting to go into my second term, starting in 2025. And Michelle had come up and asked this request. I had no clue in how to go about doing it. And that's the part about being a freshman legislator, is folks ask your request, but it allows you to do your due diligence and to learn the process of what it takes to get something like this accomplished. And it's not only me just being at that state level that accomplishes that, but it starts out with a request from Michelle. It's simply basically talking to Scott. And then I go from Scott, and I like to mention Grant Waldrop. He's our GDOT director that I have worked with diligently for this last year. And then basically you go from there, and then I get with Mayor Easton. That's just local. That's not what all the process of getting it through the House and getting it through rules and getting it through the Senate and then getting it back, amended, that type of thing. So basically, a quick story about this resolution that I got to carry. It was the very first thing that I actually did that was going to come on the House floor. And basically, you sit there and you kind of say, okay, I got to learn. You learn by watching it do it. So basically, I sat there because they said who the first sponsor of the road dedication bill is the carrier of the bill. I sat there for 2 or 3 days until that first request come across in road dedication, then I went and turned mine in. That means I'd be second carrier. Not having to say I didn't have confidence, but I wanted to learn. The chairman of the Transportation Committee, Rick Jaspers from up North Georgia, is a Keith Jackson fan. When he saw the bill come across into committee, because it gets read and then it comes into committee, he was such a fan. The chairman of a committee can kind of do what a chairman of a committee can do. He put me as first sponsor. Because he said he was excited about the dedication. But the honor of that was, even though I was the carrier of that resolution, everybody attaches onto that, so there was 18 other dedications that was attached to this resolution. So when I got to carry it, I didn't only carry the one that we're presenting today, but there was also 18 others that rode along with it. So that's the great thing about it, that it takes a team of folks to get it accomplished, and guess what? You all are the team of the folks that gets it accomplished. So thank y'all for coming out today. I think we're going to hear some great stories, and then I'll get back up shortly and kind of tell us kind of the procedures of what we can do to go down to the sign. There actually should be unveiling the signs now, if I'm not mistaken. All right, Grant? That's correct. Awesome. So thank y'all so much.
Hello, everyone. I know a lot of y'all here. My name is Scott Robinson. I'm MC Robinson's oldest son. I'm a shirt-tail cousin of Keith Jackson, as he calls it. And someone asked how we were related. We shared the same great-grandfather. Jeff and Chug Robinson in Tyus is where Keith was raised at. Before I start, I want to thank Zach Steed and Joe Garrett and Michelle Morgan for getting the momentum going, and then especially for David Huddleston for taking this through the Gold Dome and making this happen. Those guys are all the ones who made this happen. Give them all a round of applause. Now, my cousin Barbara's story here, W.J. Robinson's oldest daughter, she spent the most time with Keith and his family. And I took by a replica sign this past week. And Barbara held the sign, we took a picture, and we texted it to Turianne. Turianne is Keith's wife, and she's still living. She's 94 years old. Barbara called her on the phone then after we texted her, and got her on the phone, and we both spoke to her, and she was so appreciative and so gracious. She said if only Keith could be alive, he would be so touched to see that his hometown is doing this for him. So she was very thankful and wanted to thank all of y'all. But she's just as sharp as she can be. And I got a chance to meet Keith when I was a kid. My Uncle Frank arranged it, and we all went to the Hawks game. And Keith and Bill Russell called a lot of NBA games. You know, Keith, you can look up all the history on Keith, so I won't take up a lot of your time with that. But he started doing Monday Night Football. He did baseball. He did college football. He did everything. He did Wild World of Sports. And he told me, he said, they were shipping me all over the world. And then I said, did you enjoy that? He said, well, they paid me a lot to do it, so I guess I did. But I said, why didn't you stick with Monday Night Football? He said, I like college football the best, and I didn't like that Howard Cosell too much. So he did 1 year, and he moved on to college football, and he was the voice of college football. He told me, when I traveled some, I called him and said, hey, I want to take you and Turian. I'm coming out to California. If you're not busy, I want to take y'all out to dinner. And he could have easily said, well, you know, my schedules, I'm busy, I don't have time, and I would have understood that. And he said, nonsense, you've been traveling, you need a home-cooked meal. And I said, oh, you don't have to go to that trouble. He said, it's no trouble. It wasn't any trouble for him. He got Turian to cook the meal. And he picked me up at the hotel, and that was, you know, seeing, he's about 6'3", he's a pretty big guy. And he comes walking in and shook my hand and picked me up and took me. He walked out to his patio and said, this is where Dan Blocker lived, my neighbor. He was Hoss Cartwright, you know. For those of you that remember that good old Western Bonanza. But he was just a family man, and he loved his family. He loved his family here. He told me, he said, when I was growing up, this is when you know something is ingrained, when you got a calling. He said, I used to run up and down the cotton rows and the corn rows on the farm in Tice, calling a football game and trying to help Walter Mitty cross the goal line. Well, I had to look up Walter Mitty. I didn't know who that was. That was someone passed, you know, before me. But Keith's mother brought Keith to tie us to my great-grandfather's farm. We all share the same great-grandfather, Jeff and Shug Robinson. We still own the farm. It's in our family on Dashboard Road, on a dirt road there, and that's where he was raised. And he told me that Bo Nellie is not the name of a mule. Pearl was the name of the mule. But Bo Nellie was just a saying that Grandpa Robinson used when if he dropped something or something didn't go right, instead of saying Dad Gummit or Dad Burn it, he'd say Whoa Nellie, and that stuck with him. And he did use it. You can look it up on YouTube. He got some Michigan player said, if I score a touchdown, I want you to do it. And you can look it up. And he said this is his request. So he said, whoa, Nellie. But he was famous for that. And there was a guy named Rick Dees, if y'all remember him, out in Hollywood. Rick was good at imitating people, and he imitated Keith a lot back then. And I said, that's a form of flattery, isn't it? He said, yeah, maybe so, but I'm a country boy, and I just don't like that at all, and I don't like him. So I didn't bring up Rick Dees anymore. But he saved his money. He went to school at Tice. He saved his money and he bought a horse. And he rode the horse back and forth to school here in Roopville. There's some pictures here. They've been passed around. You can look at them. I printed one of the larger pictures. It's in the newspaper article as well. There's a picture that has Keith holding the trophy, 1946. And my research shows that Roopville had won the state championship in Class D basketball. And Bobby and Billy Maxwell are on that team. And their father, Rudy Maxwell, was the coach. Well, there's other names in there that we don't know. And we'd like for Curtis gave me a good idea to look up here in the Historical Society, look back at yearbooks, but we'd like to get all the names, and then our company will reprint a larger one, and we'll put the names left to right, front row, back row, and we'll donate it to the Historical Society. because we'd like for those names to live on. Not everybody wins the state championship, and that's kind of exciting. But Keith's daughter was a good singer, and he said, let me play. And I got to meet one daughter and one of the sons. They were there. So he put it in her cassette tape and played it, and she had a great voice. And Keith said, I was speaking in Tuskegee, Alabama, and I told the crowd there that my daughter had the right last name to make it in the music business, Jackson. As you know, Michael Jackson was big in that time, and the Jackson 5. But he really was a family man, and he enjoyed being around his family. He came home, he came to see Polly, and Polly lived in Reman, her and Bragg. So he spent a lot of time visiting them. But this is I'm so glad that we're getting this done, and we're going to have the signs here that he'll live on. Is there any friend or family member who would like to share any stories, or if you know any stories about Keith? I want to give you the opportunity. Yes?
Down at the home place, the radio he listened to, your daddy kept climbing the batteries up out of the garden. But in the tree, in the oak tree, there's a piece of antenna wire sticking about that far. It should be put in the storm spot. That's the antenna he heard the ball games.
That's true. We can do that. Yes.
We have a relative that lived here in Roopville, Rachel Bell, and he would come down and visit her occasionally. Miss Rachel Bell, everybody from Roopville knows.
Miss Rachel Bell was a relative, and he would come visit her? Judson's mother, okay. Anyone else? Well, we're going to have some fun here now. And I don't know if you guys don't know Joe Garrett, you're going to know him today. He writes articles for the Times-Georgian, and they're all great articles. And there's some copies of the paper here. But I want to ask Joe Garrett to come up now.
Thanks, Scott. What a great crowd. This is something else. I did not expect this kind of crowd today, and thank you all for coming out. And Michelle, David, thank you. It's done. I feel like, Scott, we've been talking about this for at least 6, 8, 10 years. I feel like it's been nonstop, and of getting something named in Carroll County. I wrote in a column. I realized I look back. I've written about this 3 times, that something ought to be named for Keith Jackson. And I looked back at one column and I said, okay, if you go to Pasadena, California, where the Rose Bowl is, outside there is a statue, and we have a picture of that up here, of Keith. Of Keith Jackson. And there's even a press box that's named after Keith Jackson at the Rose Bowl, but there's nothing in Carroll County. And finally, we are recognizing one of our own, which is good. I remember a few years ago, the Pulitzer Prize winning writer Rick Bragg, who some of you read some of his books. He writes for Southern Living, and he came to Carrollton, and had a chance to introduce him that day, and spent a little time with Rick backstage. And Rick said something to me that really stood out, because I was sitting there as a writer picking his brain about what any words of wisdom you could give me. And he said, well, you need to tell the stories and write them down, because if no one does, it's going to be forgotten. Because you think about, I look at this picture of the high school, and I knew some of those guys in that photo, or 2 of them at least in that photo, and they're gone. And we look around, and before we know it, we'll all be gone. And Carroll County needs to always, remember, I think, is probably the most famous person to ever come out of Carrollton. You don't believe me? Go to your computer tonight, go to YouTube, type in the name Keith Jackson, just watch what comes up. It's just unbelievable, this guy, the fame that he had. We could even send our national news reporters and even politicians to go meet with Russia and Cuba and these other places, but through sports, Keith was the first ever sportscaster to make his way into these countries. Grew up right here in our backyard. It's hard to believe that. So, a little bit about Keith. I've been fascinated with Keith Jackson since I was a child. Now, there's a story behind this. Something went wrong in the gene pool in my family. My brothers and I, when we were born, my parents, I think, when we were probably 3-4 years old, got us a tape recorder. I found some of those old tapes recently, and some people, were born with this gift and that gift and this gift or whatever. For some reason, my brothers and I can all do impressions of people. I didn't realize this because I didn't know this when I was in my four-year-old kindergarten. I went to Tabernacle Baptist Church kindergarten, and my teacher told me after the preacher, we had to go to chapel one day, we came in, I told everybody to sit down, and I started impersonating the preacher. So, I don't even remember that. Fast forward to third grade, and two of my friends at Central Primary, they had a talent show, and they were talking about, we're going to box. I said, what are you going to do? Well, he's going to be Muhammad Ali, I'm going to be Joe Frazier. And I just said, well, do you need an announcer? And they said, yeah. So I thought I could do Howard Cosell, who Keith didn't really like. And so I did this impression of Howard Cosell calling while they boxed at this, in front of everybody. And I was trying to be really serious by doing this, but the crowd was dying laughing. And I got the bug after that. I like to do impressions. Next thing you know, it was Larry Munson. I was on to him, and I was learning Larry Munson, how to do him, and entered the Larry Munson Sound-Alike contest in 1988, and didn't win, but got honorable mention. But my coaches in high school, I transferred to Carrollton High School, and I was what Coach Charlie Grisham used to call a rinky-dink. In other words, in his eyes, they didn't exist. These were the sophomore guys who were not born athletes, but they were on the team. And I'll never forget being able on a bus ride back from Lafayette, Georgia one night. All of a sudden, one of the coaches knew I did these voices. I had to go up front to the bus, and I started impersonating Larry Munson and Keith Jackson. So the next thing I know, Grisham put me in the game the next week. He didn't even know I was a week. So Keith Jackson's the reason I got to be in a football game. Thank you, Keith. And I know he didn't like people doing his impressions, but how do you do a Keith Jackson impression? Well, I didn't know how to do it, so I thought I'll start with a name, and you can do this when you get back home today, okay? And you could go, and so you start with a name, and so I would go, Herschel Walker, and then I would say it again, Herschel Walker, Herschel Walker, and I would get that down, and then I thought I needed to do another name, and I'd go, Bo Jackson, Herschel Walker, and Bo Jackson, Herschel Walker, and Bo Jackson. The next thing you know, I kept trying new words, so you hit another word, and so these were all his household words that he would say, and so I enjoyed always doing the Keith Jackson impressions. So, long story short, he said something, it's on YouTube, I found this, and they were interviewing him after he retired. This was the Fox Sports College game day or whatever, and they were asking him, just about his broadcasting style, and he said, never be afraid to turn a phrase, and if you make it interesting enough, they may not know what you just said, but they'll look it up. So I would go around and pluck things off the bush and see if there was a way I could say some things, and the older I got, the more I was willing to go back into the Southern vernacular, because some of it's funny. If you look at the broadcast industry following the Second World War, so many of the sports broadcasters were from all over the South. All of us were all over the country, but the one thing you can never forget is the playing field is the property of the players and the coaches. It is not to be used by some athletic announcer trying to make a name for himself. And that really describes who he was in so many ways. I remember a few years ago mentioning something about Keith, nothing being named for Keith in Carroll County. And it was one day, it was early at the Maple Street Diner, and Lynn Joyner's brother Jack was there. Jack and I were the only two sitting there. We were talking about Keith. I couldn't believe Jack knew him and played basketball and knew him very well. And I said, Jack, do you ever talk to him? Jack pulls out his cell phone, pulls up his number, and he showed me where he just talked to him the night before last. And but he said that Keith wouldn't have liked the attention. And that's probably the way that he was raised. Lynn told me a funny story that this photo that you can see around here with the basketball team, Keith is holding the trophy in that photo. And after that, his grandfather told him, Keith, about the trophy. He said, Keith, if you can't eat it or make money off of it, you don't need it. It's time to get back to the farm and get to work. And that was the way he had a hard life and how he grew up. But that was so ingrained in him, in his work ethic and the way that he called ball games, and he was just a household household name all over the world. Bob Costas said that there are three people he thinks about in the broadcast industry. Number one, when you think of baseball, Vin Scully, who called the Dodgers for years and then National Sports, is the voice of baseball. Jim McKay is and will always be the voice of the Olympics. Keith Jackson is and will always be the voice of college football. I reached out to some people, and they wanted to, couldn't be here today, but they wanted to pass along some words to you. This is from Jeff Dantzler. Jeff hosts the Dog Talk show for the University of Georgia. He does the pre and post game, and he's on the Georgia radio crew. And he writes this to tell you, as for me, Keith Jackson and Larry Munson are my two iconic voices of college football. Whenever he would call again, especially if it was Georgia, and especially if it was an SEC game, it just took it to the next level. Sugar Bowls, Rose Bowls. His voice and his persona was associated with the very best and the very biggest of the games when it comes to the sport. We love so. Another person, Carroll County Central High School graduate, David Sheinin. Some of you may know Dave. Dave has gone on to be a world-class, award-winning sports journalist. He's now with the Washington Post. And Dave covers, if it's the Super Bowl, World Series, big event, Dave's the one who's covering it for the Washington Post. And he wanted to pass these words along to you as well. He says, when I think or dream about college football, which is more frequently than I'd like to admit, it is always narrated in Keith Jackson's voice. Right this instant, I can hear clear as day the twang of Keith's intoning, Alabama, other than Vin Scully in baseball. I'm not sure there's a voice more singularly associated with a sport than Keith's in college football. I have heard many imitations of Keith's trademark delivery, but, and I will die on this hill, mine is absolutely the best. So after I get that from Dave, I recorded mine and I sent it to him, and he said, you win. So I'll take that. So, well, the column I wrote, I want to thank really too, but Scott, you were so helpful with getting this column together. Barbara Story, where are you? There you are, front row. You didn't even know I recycled our interview from when he died, but this column was actually a kind of a recycled. I rewrote it in some ways to make sure it was part of this program today. And so thanks to the Times Georgian and family members for getting some of these stories in this that will, hopefully be archived. So years from now, when people look back, who was Keith Jackson, they'll know he was, he was from here, a big part of Carroll County. I think if Keith could be here today, maybe I had to channel my Keith Jackson. I said, Keith, what would you say to this crowd today? So I had to let Keith's words speak through me, and I think he would say, as I look at the crowd, I see Roopville and Tyus royalty with some of the all-time greats. This is one of those signs that they're going to put out there on the intersection that will reach across generations. This is a sign where big old trucks will honk their horns as they drive along the Highway 27 to Highway 5 intersection. And most of all, this is a sign for all those young and old to shout those famous words from my great-grandfather as they drive by, "Whoa, Nellie!" So Scott, come on up. And in the words of Keith Jackson, what he would also say, and Tommy, come on up. So let's get ready to unveil this sign. Yippee! Oh boy!
Hold on. Okay, ready?
All right, thank you guys again. David, thank you again.
Thank you so much.